Alright, I'm about to tell you something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, and frankly, I don't care because there's a psychological phenomenon happening to millions of women right now that nobody wants to talk about. Here's what I've noticed. I can spot her from across a room, the woman who's about to break. She's the one everyone calls so sweet, so reliable, such a good person. She smiles at the right moments, says yes when she means no, and apologizes for existing. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll see something else. A tightness around her eyes, a forced quality to her laugh, the way she holds her breath before speaking. Most people think this is just how some women are, naturally accommodating, naturally peaceful. But I've discovered something that completely flips this assumption on its head, and it's based on decades of psychological research that reveals a disturbing truth about female socialization. You probably want to know what I'm talking about. Well, I've identified 3 stages that happen when a woman finally stops performing niceness, and I'm not just going to leave you hanging there. I'm going to show you exactly what's been brewing under that pleasant exterior, why the eventual explosion isn't actually a breakdown but a breakthrough, and most importantly, what happens when a woman finally chooses authenticity over approval. Because here's the thing, when you understand what's really happening beneath the surface of the good girl performance, you'll realize that what looks like a woman losing it is actually a woman finding herself. And the psychological mechanisms behind this transformation will change how you see every difficult woman you've ever encountered. So let's start with the first stage, and this one's going to reveal why being nice might be the most dangerous thing a woman can do to herself. Today we're diving deep into the hidden psychology of female anger, why women are conditioned to suppress their authentic responses, how this suppression creates a psychological pressure cooker that eventually explodes, and what really happens when a woman finally stops prioritizing everyone else's comfort over her own truth. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why anxiety in women is often disguised anger, why the shadow self emerges when performance becomes unbearable, and most crucially, how society's fear of female anger has created an epidemic of women who are strangers to themselves. I've spent years studying trauma psychology, feminist theory, and the neuroscience of suppressed emotions, and what I'm about to reveal goes far deeper than simple people-pleasing behaviors. But first, let me share something that might shock you. Research shows that women apologize significantly more than men, not because they make more mistakes, but because they've been conditioned to view their very existence as potentially problematic. This isn't just about individual women struggling with boundaries. This is about a systematic suppression of female authenticity that's creating anxiety epidemics, relationship dysfunction, and a generation of women who have no idea who they really are beneath the performance. Understanding this pattern isn't just enlightening, it's liberating. And for the women listening, it might be the permission you've been waiting for to finally stop being good and start being real. The woman who's about to break isn't born broken. She's systematically trained into a performance that slowly suffocates her authentic self. Picture a little girl who's naturally loud, passionate and opinionated. She speaks her mind, takes up space and expresses her emotions freely. But gradually, through thousands of tiny corrections, she learns that her natural state is problematic. Calm down, don't be so dramatic. Nice girls don't get angry. Stop being difficult. Each correction seems minor, but they accumulate like drops of water that eventually carve canyons. The message becomes clear. Your authentic emotions are inconvenient, your natural responses are wrong, and love is conditional on your ability to make others comfortable. Psychologist Carol Gilligan spent decades studying this exact phenomenon. The moment girls begin to abandon their inner voice in favor of social acceptance. What she discovered was heartbreaking. Around adolescence, girls start trading truth for connection. They begin to filter every emotion through one haunting question. Will this make someone pull away from me? This isn't conscious manipulation, it's survival strategy. Girls quickly learn that being liked is survival, and nothing threatens being liked more than honesty. So they begin to lie, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, habitual ones. They lie by nodding when they disagree, by staying quiet when they want to speak, by laughing at things that aren't funny. The tragedy is that this strategy works, at least temporarily. The good girl gets praised, rewarded, loved, or what feels like love. She becomes the one everyone can count on, the responsible one, the one who never makes anything worse. But this approval comes with an invisible price tag, the slow erosion of her authentic self. What starts as occasional performance becomes permanent identity. She says "I'm fine" on autopilot. She apologizes before speaking even when she's done nothing wrong. She becomes an expert at sensing the mood in a room and adjusting accordingly, not because she's naturally empathetic, but because she's been trained to prioritize everyone else's emotional state over her own. The good girl trap is particularly insidious because it's disguised as virtue. Society celebrates the woman who's accommodating, self-sacrificing, and emotionally contained. She's held up as the ideal, the perfect daughter, the supportive friend, the understanding partner. But underneath this celebrated exterior, something else is happening. Her nervous system is in a constant state of hypervigilance, always scanning for signs of disapproval, always ready to adjust her behaviour to maintain harmony. She becomes exhausted but can't rest, resentful but can't express it, angry but can't even admit it to herself. The most cruel aspect of this trap is that it's self-reinforcing. The more she performs niceness, the more people expect it from her. Any deviation from this pattern feels like betrayal to those around her, which reinforces her belief that her authentic emotions are dangerous and unacceptable. The good girl trap reveals that what looks like natural temperament is actually learned behaviour, a survival strategy that becomes a prison. Understanding this is the first step toward recognizing that beneath every naturally sweet woman is often someone who's been systematically trained to disappear herself. What happens to decades of swallowed anger? It doesn't disappear. It transforms into something far more destructive: anxiety, depression, and eventually, explosion. Carl Jung warned us about the shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged parts of ourselves that we've been taught to reject. For women raised to be good, that shadow is often made of everything they were told not to be. Angry, assertive, demanding, unapologetic. But the shadow doesn't stay buried forever. Emotion that is not allowed to move will always find another way out. And for women who've spent years suppressing their authentic responses, this often manifests as what appears to be mental health issues, but is actually emotional constipation. The anxiety epidemic among women isn't random. It's what happens when the body has been trained to suppress its most honest reactions. When your natural instinct to push back, to stand up, to protect yourself gets short-circuited over and over again, your nervous system doesn't relax. It adapts by becoming hypervigilant. Think about it. If you can't fight, your only option is to anticipate, to control, to please. That constant performance of adjusting yourself to meet others' comfort comes with a physiological cost. You smile in meetings while your insides twist. You nod in conversations you don't agree with. You carry emotions like bricks through your day. Psychologist Harriet Lerner identified this pattern in her groundbreaking work on female anger. She found that women aren't taught how to use anger, they're taught how to fear it. When a man expresses anger, it's seen as powerful, decisive. When a woman expresses the same emotion, it's called dramatic, hysterical, overreacting. So women learn to give their anger new names: stress, fatigue, overwhelm, anxiety. They don't confront their anger, they orbit around it, bury it, redirect it. They snap in places where it doesn't belong and stay silent where it's begging to be spoken. But suppressed emotion builds pressure like steam in a kettle. The woman who's spent years saying "I'm fine" when she's not, "it's no big deal" when it is, eventually reaches a breaking point. The shadow erupts not because she's unstable, but because she's unexpressed. This eruption often looks irrational to others because they've never seen the gradual accumulation of violations, compromises, and silenced truths that led to this moment. To them, she's having a breakdown. But what's really happening is a breakthrough. The moment when her authentic self, buried under decades of people-pleasing, finally claws its way to the surface. The eruption might happen in a meeting where she finally speaks up, in a relationship where she finally sets boundaries, or simply in her own life where she stops explaining herself and starts living authentically. It's messy, uncomfortable, and often misunderstood, but it's not pathology, it's emergence. The shadow eruption isn't a breakdown, it's the moment when years of suppressed authenticity finally demand recognition. What looks like instability is actually the first sign of psychological health in a woman who's been performing stability at the cost of her soul. When a woman finally stops performing niceness, something unexpected happens. She doesn't become a monster, she becomes herself. Before we continue, if you're finding this exploration eye-opening, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Understanding these psychological patterns could be life-changing for someone you know, and sharing this knowledge helps us reach more people who need to hear it. After the mask cracks, after the performance becomes unbearable, after she stops filtering every word through fear, there's a period of disorientation. The woman who's spent decades asking, "What will make others comfortable?" suddenly finds herself asking, "What do I actually want?" This isn't a smooth transition. There's grief involved. Grief for the years spent silencing herself, grief for the relationships built on false foundations, grief for the woman she could have been if she'd never learned to shrink. But underneath that grief is something she hasn't felt in years: clarity. Her anger, no longer disguised as anxiety or depression, finally reveals itself for what it really is: a compass pointing toward what isn't working, what needs to change, what deserves protection. Anger shows up when boundaries have been crossed, when values have been dismissed, when needs have been ignored for the 100th time. She begins to understand that anger was never the enemy. It was the most honest part of her all along. The part that refused to accept disrespect, that knew she deserved better, that insisted this is not okay. Her anger doesn't make her broken. It proves she's awake. This awakening doesn't make her cruel or uncaring. Instead, she becomes discriminating. She stops over-explaining her decisions. She says no without guilt, and yes only when she means it. She doesn't rehearse her boundaries. She lives them. She's no longer trying to be liked. She's trying to be honest. What others once called rage, she now recognizes as direction. That edge in her voice isn't a threat, it's clarity. That tension in her body isn't dysfunction, it's wisdom. That refusal to carry others' comfort while abandoning her own isn't selfish, it's sacred. The authenticity awakening reveals that the difficult woman was never the problem. The problem was a system that demanded she disappear herself to be acceptable. When she stops participating in that system, she doesn't become dangerous, she becomes powerful. This power isn't about dominance or aggression, it's about integration. The ability to hold her full emotional range without apology, to move through the world without constantly monitoring others' reactions, to exist without permission. People around her might resist this change. They might ask, what's wrong with her, or pressure her to return to her former accommodating self. But she's tasted authenticity now, and there's no going back to the performance. The authenticity awakening reveals that what we call difficult women are often just women who've stopped being willing to disappear themselves for others' comfort. Their supposed difficulty is actually their return to psychological health. When a woman stops being nice, it doesn't just change her, it exposes the unspoken contracts that held everyone else's comfortable illusions in place. The woman who stops performing niceness quickly discovers something unsettling. Many of her relationships were built on her willingness to be smaller than she really is. When she begins showing up authentically, some people don't just dislike the change, they actively resist it. This resistance isn't random. Authentic women are threatening to a system that depends on female compliance. When one woman stops over-accommodating, it makes other women question why they're still doing it. When one woman sets boundaries without guilt, it challenges others to examine their own boundaryless relationships. The social reckoning often begins with subtle pushback. Friends might say she's changed or become difficult. Family members might pressure her to go back to how she used to be. Partners might express discomfort with her newfound assertiveness, claiming they miss the old her. But here's what they're really missing. They miss having someone who would sacrifice her own needs to meet theirs. They miss the convenience of her endless accommodation. They miss being able to rely on her silence when speaking up would be inconvenient. This social resistance serves as a test, revealing which relationships were based on genuine connection and which were based on her willingness to shrink. The people who truly care about her will adjust to her authenticity, even if it takes time. Those who only valued her for her compliance will often fade away. The authentic woman faces a choice: return to performance to maintain these relationships, or continue toward authenticity and accept that some connections will end. This choice is particularly difficult because women are socialized to believe that maintaining relationships is their responsibility. even relationships that require them to betray themselves. But the social reckoning also reveals something powerful. There are people who are drawn to authenticity, who respect boundaries, who appreciate honesty even when it's uncomfortable. These connections, built on truth rather than performance, become the foundation of genuine intimacy. The woman who chooses authenticity often finds that while she may have fewer relationships, the ones that remain are deeper, more honest, and more satisfying. She's no longer surrounded by people who love a performance. She's surrounded by people who love her. This shift from quantity to quality in relationships mirrors her internal shift from performing to being. She's no longer trying to be everything to everyone. She's being herself to those who can handle it. The social reckoning reveals that authentic women don't lose the right relationships, they lose the wrong ones. The resistance they face isn't evidence that they're wrong, but evidence that they're challenging a system that benefits from their silence. The goal isn't to swing from suppression to explosion, it's to find the middle ground where authenticity and wisdom coexist. Once a woman has tasted authenticity, the challenge becomes learning to wield it responsibly. The pendulum often swings from years of suppression to a period of raw, unfiltered expression. This phase is necessary but not sustainable. The integration challenge involves learning to honour her emotions without being ruled by them, to express her truth without burning down everything around her, to maintain her authentic voice while still considering the impact of her words. This isn't about returning to people-pleasing, it's about developing emotional intelligence alongside emotional honesty. She learns to ask, is this the right time? Is this the right person? What am I trying to accomplish with this expression? Integration means she no longer suppresses her anger, but she doesn't necessarily express it in every moment it arises. Instead, she uses it as information, data about what needs attention, protection, or change. She might feel angry in a meeting but choose to address the issue privately later. She might feel frustrated with a friend but wait until she can communicate clearly rather than reactively. This isn't suppression, it's strategy. The difference is that she's making conscious choices about when and how to express herself, rather than reflexively silencing herself to maintain peace. Her emotions are still valid, still honoured, still listened to, but they're not the only factor in her decision-making. The integrated woman develops what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different types of anger, frustration, disappointment, and hurt. She can identify whether she's angry about this specific situation or whether this situation triggered older, unresolved anger. She also learns to separate her worth from others' reactions to her authenticity. When someone calls her difficult or changed, she doesn't automatically assume she's done something wrong. She evaluates the feedback through the lens of her own values, rather than immediately adjusting to regain approval. Integration involves developing comfort with being misunderstood. Not everyone will appreciate her authenticity, and that's acceptable. She's no longer trying to be palatable to everyone, she's trying to be honest to herself. This doesn't mean she becomes callous or inconsiderate. If anything, her authenticity often makes her more genuinely caring because she's responding from truth rather than obligation. Her kindness becomes choice rather than compulsion. The integration challenge reveals that the goal isn't to become an angry woman, but to become a whole woman, one who can access her full emotional range without apology, while still choosing her responses wisely. When a woman stops being nice and starts being real, the transformation doesn't stop with her. It creates ripples that change every relationship and system she touches. The woman who has integrated her authenticity becomes a different kind of force in the world. She's no longer managing everyone else's emotions or taking responsibility for their comfort. This shift creates space for others to develop their own emotional intelligence and responsibility. Her children, if she has them, grow up seeing a model of healthy boundaries and emotional honesty. Instead of learning that love means self-sacrifice, they see that love can coexist with self-respect. They witness someone who can say no without guilt and yes without resentment. Her friendships transform from surface-level pleasantries to deep, meaningful connections. Because she's no longer afraid of conflict, she can navigate disagreements without avoiding them or exploding over them. This creates the safety for others to be authentic as well. In professional settings, she becomes the woman who speaks up in meetings, who negotiates her worth, who doesn't automatically volunteer for every extra task. Her colleagues might initially resist this change, but over time, many begin to model similar behaviour. The ripple effect extends beyond her immediate circle. When women see another woman living authentically, setting boundaries, expressing herself clearly, refusing to shrink, it gives them permission to examine their own performances. One woman's freedom can catalyze another's awakening. This is why authentic women are often either celebrated or vilified, but rarely ignored. They represent possibility to those ready to change and threat to those invested in the status quo. Their very existence challenges the narrative that women must choose between being loved and being real. The integrated woman often finds herself in unexpected leadership roles, not because she's seeking power, but because authenticity naturally creates authority. People trust someone who's clearly not performing, even if they don't always like what she has to say. Her impact isn't always immediate or obvious. Sometimes it's a conversation that plants a seed, a boundary that demonstrates possibility, or simply the example of someone living without constant apology for their existence. The ultimate ripple effect is cultural change. As more women choose authenticity over approval, the expectation that women should be endlessly accommodating begins to shift. What once seemed revolutionary, a woman expressing anger, setting boundaries, prioritizing her needs, gradually becomes normal. The ripple effect reveals that one woman's journey from performance to authenticity doesn't just change her life, it gives other women permission to reclaim their own voices and creates a cascade of psychological liberation that can transform entire communities. Understanding what happens when a woman stops being nice reveals something fundamental about human psychology. Authenticity isn't just personal healing, it's social revolution. The journey from performance to authenticity isn't easy. It involves grief, resistance, discomfort, and the courage to disappoint people who prefer the performance. But on the other side of that journey lies something invaluable, the experience of being known and loved for who you really are rather than who you pretend to be. For the women listening, your anger isn't a flaw to be fixed, it's information to be honoured. Your discomfort with endless accommodation isn't evidence that you're selfish, it's evidence that you're human. Your desire to stop performing and start being real isn't a betrayal of your relationships, it's an invitation to deeper intimacy. The world doesn't need more nice women, it needs more honest ones. It needs women who can model the integration of strength and compassion, who can show that authenticity and kindness aren't mutually exclusive, who can demonstrate that being real doesn't mean being cruel. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, your truth matters, and the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space is the moment you give every other woman permission to do the same. What do you think? Have you experienced this journey from performance to authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this exploration resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more content about the psychology of human authenticity.